Welcome, weary traveler, to another quiet evening with Sleepy Historian. Tonight, we drift far back in time, to the soft hush of the Nile after dusk, to the land of the Pharaohs, where golden light once shimmered across calm waters, and the scent of baked barley and honey lingered in the still, cooling air. This is boring history for sleep, a gentle passage through the past, meant to soothe your mind and slow your breath. If this kind of calm storytelling helps you rest, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it truly brings you peace. And if you're listening somewhere quiet, let me know in the comments where you are and what time it is. It's strangely comforting to know who else is out there, drifting together through time, falling asleep to the same old stories. So settle in, dim the lights, let the hum of the ancient world fill your thoughts. This is bedtime relaxation through soft storytelling, a soft-spoken history documentary about what pharaohs really ate before sleep, a quiet journey into relaxing history to fall asleep to. For fans of Roman history, archaeology, and calm narration, though tonight our focus lies further east along the slow, eternal river. Imagine the world thousands of years ago. The faint flicker of oil lamps casting long shadows across cool limestone walls, servants moving softly with trays of fruit and bread, and the pharaoh himself reclining on linen cushions, his body perfumed with incense, his mind perhaps wandering toward dreams of the afterlife. You can almost hear the gentle rhythm of the Nile, the rustle of palm leaves in the night air, the whisper of distant prayers to gods who guarded the stars. In this calm, ancient world, food was never just food. It was a ritual, a symbol, a bridge between the mortal and the divine. Tonight, we'll explore what those last meals might have been like, not through excitement or mystery, but through the quiet rhythm of daily life, the slow unfolding of customs, and the soft hum of history at rest. Our journey will unfold in 4 gentle parts. First, we'll walk among ordinary Egyptians and their humble evening meals. Then, we'll step into the chambers of the pharaoh himself, tracing the quiet routines that preceded royal slumber. Next, we'll explore the rituals, offerings, and mysterious beliefs that shaped how Egyptians connected food to eternity. And finally, we'll look to the contrasts between palace and village, between abundance and scarcity, to understand the rhythm that bound them all beneath the same eternal sky. So, take a deep breath. Let the day fall away. The past is waiting softly, patiently, as it always has. Let's begin. Imagine yourself at the quiet edge of the Nile, sometime around 1300 BCE. The air is thick with warmth that lingers from the day, yet softened now by the hush of evening. A gentle breeze moves over the river, carrying the smell of damp reeds, clay, and the faint sweetness of crushed dates drying on woven mats. The sun has slipped beneath the horizon, leaving a pale, rose-gold glow that fades into deep blue. In the villages that line the riverbank, small hearths flicker to life, tiny points of orange light in the darkness. This was the hour of calm, the hour when daily labor came to rest. For most Egyptians, life followed the steady rhythm of the Nile. Work began with dawn and ended when the light withdrew. Men returned from the fields where they had guided oxen and turned the earth, their feet darkened with soil that had been both gift and burden since the first kings. Women gathered around low clay stoves, kneading barley dough, stirring stews thick with lentils or chickpeas, and grinding spices with slow, circular patience. Children fetched water from the communal jars and chased each other among the shadows until the call of a mother's voice drew them home. The houses were simple, sun-dried brick walls, flat roofs, floors made of packed earth. In this world of texture and quiet endurance, every detail spoke of continuity. The smell of smoke and grain, the sound of pottery lids shifting, the dim glow of a lamp carved from limestone, its wick floating in oil. Meals were taken not in grand feasts, but in small gatherings. Families seated close together on the floor, the meal shared from a single dish. Bread was the heart of it all, coarse, heavy loaves made from emmer wheat or barley. sometimes flavored with coriander or sweetened with honey when harvests were kind. They dipped the bread into bowls of lentil stew or mashed beans mixed with herbs and onions. There was often beer, thick, cloudy, and nourishing, more food than drink. A taste both bitter and comforting, brewed from barley left to ferment in the heat. This was the flavor of ordinary life, simple, sustaining, and bound to the river's rhythm. As you picture this, feel the calm repetition of their existence. Day after day, season after season, the same motions, the same ingredients, the same sense of quiet endurance. When night came, there was no great change in pace, only the soft settling of bodies and thoughts. The family gathered, ate, perhaps shared a few quiet words, and then lay down to rest. The hum of insects replaced the chatter of work, and the deep, endless sound of the Nile became the lullaby of the land. Food, in these moments, was not merely sustenance. It was memory, comfort, and order. Each loaf of bread, a small echo of creation. For the Egyptians believed that to eat was to participate in the balance of the universe. The gods had set the rhythm, and humans maintained it through their daily acts. To grind the grain, to bake the dough, to offer thanks. These were all quiet prayers of continuity. If you listen closely in your imagination, you might hear the rhythmic thud of grain being crushed beneath stone pestles, the murmured songs of women at work, the splash of water being poured into clay jars, the faint laughter of children echoing between mud brick walls. Then, as the stars brightened above, the sound of silence returning, soft, encompassing, and ancient. There were small luxuries, even for the humble. A few dates tucked away for sweetness after supper. A little honey if fortune smiled. Sometimes a piece of dried fish, caught from the very river that sustained them all. Yet even these simple pleasures carried meaning. Every act of eating, from the smallest crumb to the grandest feast, was a way of acknowledging life's fragile, recurring miracle. And when the meal was done, the hearth was covered, the oil lamps dimmed, and the night stretched long and still. In that darkness, beneath the same stars that shine above us now, an Egyptian farmer might close his eyes, his body weary but his heart steady, knowing tomorrow would bring the same endless rhythm, the same sun, the same river, the same bread. History often speaks of kings and monuments, of wars and wonders. But most of the past was lived quietly in the dim light of homes like these. The story of Egypt, in truth, is not written only on temple walls or in golden tombs, but in the smell of barley baking, in the soft voices around a clay bowl, in the act of sharing what little there was. And as you listen now, drifting between wakefulness and rest, you're closer to that ancient peace than you might think. The peace of repetition, of warmth, of food and family, and the endless flow of the Nile. The days in Egypt began early, with the first faint light touching the riverbanks and the call of ibises breaking the silence of dawn. Yet the story of what the pharaohs ate before sleep began much earlier, in the humble routines of the workers and farmers who made such abundance possible. To understand the pharaoh's table, one must first understand the quiet labor that filled the days of those who served the land. Imagine the great fields stretching away from the Nile, soft with the recent flood's retreat. The soil, dark and fertile, clung to the farmers' feet as they bent to sow seeds, barley, emmer wheat, flax. The rhythm of their motion was unchanging, steady as breath. Scatter, press, cover, repeat. The Nile's flood had both blessed and dictated their lives, and its predictable generosity was matched only by its quiet demand for effort. As the sun rose, women began their own rituals within the walls of their homes. There was the slow turning of the grindstone, a heavy slab of basalt worn smooth by centuries of use. Kneeling women ground the grain in patient rhythm, a motion passed from mother to daughter. The sound it made, a soft, repetitive scraping, echoed like a heartbeat through the settlement. In that sound, the essence of Egyptian life could be heard. Continuity, endurance, quiet devotion. The flour was coarse, filled with fragments of husk and sand that found their way between the teeth. Yet to them, it was nourishment, stability, life itself. mixed with water drawn from the Nile, shaped by hand, and baked against the side of clay ovens. The bread that emerged was dense and fragrant, its crust darkened by heat. This was the daily offering of the land to its people. Beside the bread came the humble accompaniments, small bowls of beans, lentils, or chickpeas stewed with leeks and garlic. The scent was strong yet familiar, filling the house and clinging to the cool night air. There were onions, believed to purify the body and ward away decay. Cucumbers, cool and watery, a rare pleasure in the heat. Sometimes dried fish or salted goose was shared among the family. The taste of the Nile transformed into sustenance. The men who worked the royal estates or temple granaries saw food as a measure of favor. To be fed from the Pharaoh's stores was to be under divine protection, for all food in Egypt ultimately belonged to the king, who was considered both ruler and intermediary between gods and men. Each loaf, each jug of beer, was touched by his symbolic presence. At sunset, when the air softened again and the color of the sky turned to deep indigo, the work of preparation began anew. Bread for the next day's meals was mixed and left to rise near the hearth. Beer jars were sealed with clay to ferment through the night. The smell of grain and yeast mingled with that of burning wood, creating a perfume that would have been entirely ordinary to them, a fragrance of routine, of sustenance, of the passing of time. Picture a small courtyard, the walls pale with the dust of centuries. A cat winds between a woman's legs as she shapes loaves on a reed mat. In the corner, a child arranges dried herbs, mint, cumin, and fenugreek into small woven baskets. Each movement is quiet, methodical, almost meditative. The rhythm of these gestures connected every home, every village, every generation. And as the night deepened, the people of Egypt gathered once more to eat what they had shaped with their own hands. There was conversation, though subdued, perhaps the recounting of a day's labor, the murmured gratitude to the gods, the soothing repetition of a household prayer. The act of eating together reaffirmed more than physical strength. It affirmed belonging. It is said that when the Egyptians dreamed, they often dreamed of abundance, of fields heavy with grain, of baskets filled with figs and pomegranates, of tables bearing roasted duck and honeyed wine. Dreams, to them, were not random illusions, but echoes from the divine realm. Perhaps as they drifted into sleep, their minds carried these humble scenes upward, offering them to Osiris and Isis, who watched over both the living and the dead. Even the Pharaoh's most elaborate meal was rooted in this same rhythm. The grains ground by unseen hands, the honey collected by nameless keepers of bees, the vegetables pulled from fields shared with laborers and priests, all flowed upward through the vast structure of Egypt's social order, until at last they reached the royal plate. The grandeur of the palace was built upon the patience of countless small, steady acts. When you imagine this world, allow yourself to feel the slowness of it. The way time stretched, not in minutes or hours, but in seasons. The calm certainty that the river would rise again. The steady repetition of tasks that shaped both life and memory. The Egyptians understood something we often forget, that peace does not come from change, but from rhythm. And so, as they finished their evening meals and lay down on mats woven from papyrus reeds, they did not seek excitement or novelty. They sought only the quiet comfort of continuity, to wake again to the same sun, the same river, and the same endless hum of life. Night settled slowly across the Nile Valley, bringing with it a deep and velvety stillness. In the small clay houses of the villages, the lamps burned low, their wicks curling and sputtering in the warm air. The last traces of smoke from evening hearths rose toward the dark sky, mingling with the faint scent of baked bread and burnt oil. The sound of insects swelled gently, a natural chorus echoing through the reeds. This was the time when life exhaled. The day's heat, the work, the noise of the marketplace, all of it faded into the quiet rhythm of sleep. Inside, families settled themselves upon mats woven from papyrus or palm fibers. The floor, cool and smooth, carried the lingering warmth of the day. The people lay close, sometimes with a thin linen cloth drawn over them, sometimes with none at all. The world outside was immense and unknowable, but within these narrow walls there was familiarity and safety. Before rest, however, came the last, simple ritual, the evening meal's conclusion. The bowls were rinsed with a little water from the jar, crumbs were brushed aside, and what remained of the bread or lentils was carefully saved for the next day. Nothing was wasted. Even the smallest piece might feed a child or serve as an offering to the household gods. These small clay figures, worn smooth by touch, sat in niches in the wall, their faces serene and their eyes fixed in eternal calm. A bit of bread, a drop of beer, perhaps a dried fig, will be placed before them as thanks. Imagine yourself there, the light dim, the air soft and slow, the steady hum of crickets, the faint rustle of palm fronds outside the doorway. Someone might hum a tune, low and rhythmic, the same melody sung by their ancestors 100 generations before. A small comfort, a familiar sound in a world that never hurried. There was a quiet philosophy to their lives, a belief that every act, no matter how ordinary, was bound to cosmic order. To eat and to rest was not separate from worship. The gods had set the pattern, and humans simply followed it, day after day, like the turning of the sun across the sky. The pharaoh embodied that order on a grand scale, but in each home, it was lived out in smaller, humbler forms. In the flickering light of the lamp, shadows danced across the walls, sometimes catching on the carved images of protective spirits. Bes, the dwarf god of household joy and sleep. Tarit, the gentle hippopotamus goddess who guarded mothers and children. Their presence, like the hum of the night, was reassuring. The Egyptians did not fear the darkness. It was a time of renewal, a necessary balance to the burning brightness of the day. The rhythm of the night was marked by silence, but it was never empty. Outside, the Nile itself moved in slow murmurs, a deep, endless sound that had shaped every breath of Egyptian existence. Its waters reflected the constellations the priests studied, Orion, which they called Sa, the soul of Osiris, and the bright star Sirius, or Sopdet, whose appearance foretold the coming floods. To the people lying in their homes, those lights above were not distant or abstract. They were reminders that the world was ordered, dependable, and eternal. As sleep came, it came gradually, the mind slipping into dreams that echoed the waking world. Some dreamed of harvests, endless fields of grain waving beneath the sun. Others dreamed of cool water or of sitting beside the river watching boats drift past. Dreams like food or nourishment. They were part of the same cycle of giving and receiving. And among those who lived near the great estates or temple complexes, another kind of dream lingered. The thought of what life might be like for those within the palace walls. What did the pharaoh eat at the end of his day? Did he too dip his bread into a bowl or drink beer before sleep? Was his food different in kind or only in quantity and ritual? These questions were never far from the imagination of the common people, for the pharaoh's world was both distant and profoundly connected to their own. The night deepened, and in that stillness, the two worlds, the humble and the divine, coexisted in quiet harmony. The same moon that shone on the farmer's hut gleamed faintly on the golden walls of the palace. The same air moved through the reeds by the river and across the polished courtyards where servants prepared the royal trays. The same stars reflected in the eyes of those who dreamed in linen robes and those who dreamed in threadbare tunics. For all their differences, all Egyptians, farmer or pharaoh, ended the day in the same elemental way, with food, with rest, with gratitude. And when sleep came, it was not only for the body but for the spirit, a moment of balance between the known and the eternal. Soon, in our story, we will move from the humble to the grand, from these simple hearths to the palace kitchens of Thebes and Memphis. There, beneath painted ceilings and fluted columns, another meal awaits, rich in meaning, steeped in ceremony, and touched by the belief that what one eats before sleep can echo in eternity. But for now, linger a moment longer in this calm darkness. Feel the slow, patient rhythm of the ancient night and the comfort of lives lived close to the earth, where even the smallest act of eating held a trace of the divine. As the common folk of Egypt settled into their quiet rest, the world within the palace began to shimmer awake. Though night cloaked the city in darkness, the royal residence gleamed with lamplight, soft and golden, flickering across painted pillars and polished floors. The palace of a pharaoh was not a place that slept easily. Even in stillness, it hummed with quiet movement. The shuffle of linen garments, the murmur of attendants, the faint ring of bronze bowls being polished in preparation for the royal meal. Imagine yourself walking through those grand halls. The air is thick with perfume, frankincense and myrrh rising from shallow bronze burners, mingling with the faint scent of lotus and sweet wine. The walls are alive with color, blue for the heavens, gold for the sun, green for the life-giving Nile. Every surface seems to breathe divinity. Here, everything is ritual, nothing is ordinary. The pharaoh's evening meal, the last before rest, was not merely a matter of taste or appetite. It was a ceremony, a quiet reenactment of the cosmic order. Just as the sun set and Ra, the sun god, descended into the underworld, the pharaoh too prepared for his nightly journey, from the waking world to the dream realm, from life to the threshold of rebirth. What he ate, how he was served, and even the silence in which he dined all reflected this sacred transition. The servants entered in near silence, trained to move like drifting shadows. Each carried a platter, crafted from gold or alabaster, laden with offerings. Roasted duck glazed with honey, figs split open to reveal their crimson hearts, baskets of pomegranates, grapes, and freshly baked white bread made from the finest sifted flour. There were dates soaked in wine, slices of melon chilled in cool jars of water, and small bowls of spiced lentils. The variety was vast, yet every element was chosen for meaning. The duck symbolized the nourishment of the Nile, the bread, rebirth, the figs, fertility and divine sweetness. Even the act of eating from certain directions, left hand to right, from west to east, reflected cosmic alignment. Nothing, not even the smallest gesture, was casual. The pharaoh reclined on a low couch inlaid with ebony and ivory, draped in linen fine as mist. His head was often anointed with oil scented with blue lotus, the flower of sleep and spiritual awakening. In one hand, he might hold a small golden cup filled with sweet wine diluted with water. In the other, a delicate piece of fruit peeled by an attendant. The quiet clatter of serving plates echoed softly through the chamber, blending with the murmur of priests reciting invocations in the background. Though the scene might seem luxurious, it was not one of indulgence. Every bite was a statement of harmony between man and God, earth and heaven, life and eternity. The pharaoh's meal was as much an offering as a feast. It affirmed that the world was in balance, that the gods were pleased, and that Egypt would awaken again at dawn as it always had. The palace kitchens that supplied these meals were themselves small kingdoms of order and discipline. Dozens of bakers, brewers, butchers, and perfumers worked in hushed coordination. Fires glowed through the night as cooks prepared breads in conical ovens, stirred honey sauces in copper pots, and arranged fruit in neat spirals upon alabaster trays. The air would have been thick with warmth and aroma. Roasted meat, melting honey, crushed herbs. In this world of abundance, silence was a sign of reverence. And yet, even here, the connection to the ordinary people of Egypt remained strong. The same grain milled by farmers in distant villages filled the pharaoh's bread. The same river fish, seasoned and smoked, appeared upon his table. What set his meal apart was not its origin, but its meaning. In the palace, food was language, a way of speaking to the gods through taste and fragrance, a nightly dialogue between heaven and earth. After the last dish was cleared, a priest would approach quietly, bearing a small bowl of milk mixed with honey and crushed lotus petals, a drink meant to calm the body and invite peaceful dreams. The pharaoh would sip it slowly as the attendants withdrew. Around him, The room dimmed to a soft glow, and the sense of incense deepened into stillness. The act of sleep for the pharaoh was never just rest. It was a symbolic descent into the underworld, mirroring the journey of Ra through the night sky. The royal dreams were believed to carry messages, guidance for the living, whispers from the gods. And so, the meal before sleep held a special sanctity. It was both nourishment and preparation for communion with eternity. Beyond the palace walls, the night lay vast and silent. The same stars glittered above the farmers' huts and the royal courtyard alike. But within these gilded chambers, time felt slower, heavier, almost sacred. The world outside might change. Dynasties might rise and fall. Yet the pharaoh's nightly ritual endured, steady as the river's flow. And so, beneath the golden ceiling painted with constellations, as the last of the incense burned away, Egypt's living god closed his eyes and surrendered to the night, not in fatigue, but in reverent trust that the sun and life itself would return. In the royal chambers, time seemed to move differently, not in hours or minutes, but in gestures, in symbols, in slow and deliberate repetition. For the pharaoh, each evening meal was an act of devotion, an acknowledgement that his life was intertwined with the eternal rhythm of the gods. What he consumed before sleep was chosen not merely for pleasure, but to sustain both body and spirit, to maintain the fragile balance between the mortal and the divine. As the last rays of sun withdrew beyond the western horizon, the land of the setting sun, the symbolic realm of death, the palace entered its own twilight. Servants lit new lamps, filling the air with the scent of burning oil and frankincense. The sound of sandals on stone softened as priests entered quietly to perform the evening purification rites. At the center of this calm procession sat a small table, its surface gleaming under the lamplight. Upon it rested the carefully arranged meal, modest in quantity, abundant in meaning. There might be bread made from the finest white flour, symbolizing purity. There were figs and pomegranates, fruits of regeneration, their rich colors representing life and rebirth. A portion of roasted goose or duck, glistening with honey, honored the river that fed the land. There was also beer and wine, both sacred and symbolic. Beer for the people and their daily sustenance, wine for the gods and their eternal banquet. The pharaoh's attendants would anoint his hands with perfumed oil before he began. In some accounts, priests murmured quiet prayers, invoking Hathor, goddess of joy, nourishment, and sleep, to bless the food and the dreams that would follow. The pharaoh himself might remain silent, eyes half-lidded, his breathing slow and measured. His meal was not hurried. Each bite was part of a pattern, a sacred rhythm, a gentle echo of creation itself. Imagine the texture of that bread, dense, faintly sweet, touched with sesame or honey. The taste of figs, soft and sticky, leaving a lingering warmth on the tongue. The beer, thick and cloudy, carrying the faint bitterness of barley and the sweetness of date syrup. The air heavy with incense, the soft flicker of gold and amber light. It was not excess that defined this meal, but serenity, the art of taking what was abundant and transforming it into something eternal through ritual and awareness. For the Egyptians, the act of eating was inseparable from the act of worship. To consume the produce of the Nile was to partake in the body of the gods themselves, for all nourishment flowed from divine generosity. Even the pharaoh, the son of Ra, was sustained by the same bread that fed his subjects, though his bread was sifted, purified, and sanctified by priestly hands. After the meal, servants poured cool water scented with lotus petals over the pharaoh's hands. A priest recited verses from the hymns of the night, invoking the safe passage of Ra through the underworld. The day closes and darkness rises, he would say, "May the great God awaken renewed, and with him all who serve his light." The pharaoh listened in stillness, the cadence of the words blending with the gentle crackle of the lamps. Nearby, a small shrine gleamed with offerings, tiny loaves, bowls of milk, garlands of flowers. These were meant not for the pharaoh himself, but for the gods who guided his sleep. The chamber became a microcosm of the cosmos, the ceiling painted with constellations, the walls depicting celestial boats carrying deities across the night sky, and the floor representing the fertile earth below. To dine here was to eat at the center of the universe. When the last prayer was spoken and the food cleared away, attendants brought forth a golden goblet filled with sweetened milk mixed with honey and crushed carob pods, a soothing drink believed to open the way to peaceful dreams. The pharaoh would drink slowly, savoring the warmth as it spread through his body. Around him, silence thickened, broken only by the faint whisper of wind against the stone lattice. He might then speak softly to a favored priest or scribe, discussing omens or the movements of the stars. For the Egyptians believed that sleep was a sacred voyage, a journey through the hidden realms of the Duat, the underworld. In dreams, the pharaoh could commune with ancestors and gods, receiving visions that guided the kingdom's fate. Thus, to prepare for sleep was to prepare for prophecy. Outside, the night deepened to a color beyond black, the soft, endless shade of eternity itself. The palace quieted, save for the low murmur of distant servants. The great statues that guarded the gates stood still and solemn beneath the moon, their stone faces bathed in silver light. Within, the pharaoh's bed was made ready, fine linen sheets perfumed with cedar and lotus, pillows filled with down. The air cooled slightly, and in that stillness, one could almost sense the invisible rhythm of Egypt's heart, the endless exchange between earth and sky, between mortal and divine. The pharaoh's last waking thought, perhaps, was not of power or conquest, but of order, that tomorrow, as always, the sun would rise again, the Nile would flow, and the cycle would continue. In this calm certainty, he lay down to rest, wrapped not only in linen, but in the assurance that his sleep, like his reign, was part of the eternal design. The royal bedchamber was a world unto itself, a place suspended between time and eternity. As the pharaoh's attendants withdrew, the great doors closed with a soft, hollow sound, sealing the night within. The air shimmered faintly with the scent of cedar, lotus, and honey. Oil lamps burned low, their flames reflected in the polished surfaces of gold and alabaster. Outside, the desert winds whispered along the palace walls, carrying the smell of sand and cool stone. In this quiet sanctum, sleep was not seen as mere rest, but as a sacred passage. For the pharaoh, God among men, yet bound by mortal limits, the act of dreaming held immense spiritual weight. It was believed that the gods spoke most clearly when the body was silent and the mind adrift. Each night's sleep mirrored the cosmic journey of Ra through the Duat, the underworld, his boat sailing through darkness, battling chaos, and emerging renewed with the dawn. The pharaoh's bed was both throne and altar, crafted from carved wood inlaid with gold. It stood upon lion-shaped legs, symbols of protection and power. Fine linen sheets, spun so thin they seemed woven from air, were laid over him by gentle hands. Beneath his head, a curved wooden headrest supported his neck, allowing the breath to flow freely. For to breathe was to partake of life itself, a gift from the god Shu, the keeper of air. Before extinguishing the final lamp, a priest entered quietly, carrying a small bronze bowl filled with glowing embers. Over it, he scattered powdered resin and herbs, myrrh, juniper, and crushed lotus petals. The rising smoke curled upward in slow, graceful threads, filling the room with a fragrance said to invite divine presence. The pharaoh closed his eyes as the priest murmured words of protection. May your soul journey safely. O son of Ra, may your heart be light as the feather of Maat. May you awaken renewed with the sun. Then, with measured steps, the priest departed, and the door was sealed. The room dimmed to near darkness. The golden ornaments on the walls caught only the faintest flicker of lamplight, stars imprisoned in the silence of stone. The pharaoh's breathing slowed, steady and deep, in rhythm with the eternal pulse of the Nile beyond the walls. In this stillness, dreams began to unfold, not the fleeting images of ordinary sleep, but vast, ordered visions. In his dreams, the pharaoh might walk beside the gods, converse with ancestors, or travel upon the solar bark through fields of eternal grain. Sometimes he saw symbols, a lotus opening, a falcon in flight, a river of light flowing backward through time. Each image held meaning, deciphered the next morning by priests who specialized in dream interpretation. Dreams, to the Egyptians, were not private illusions. They were messages carried through sacred channels, glimpses of truth veiled in mystery. A favorable dream could affirm divine favor. A troubling one might call for offerings or prayers to restore balance. The pharaoh's sleep was therefore a matter not only of personal peace, but of cosmic stability. If he dreamed well, Egypt would thrive. Imagine the stillness of that chamber now. The faint rustle of linen, the distant cry of a desert owl, the low hum of the night wind beyond the windows. The stars above the palace were the same stars that glimmered above the poorest hut, and yet, here they seemed to lean closer, as if drawn by reverence. The silence was immense but comforting, as though the entire kingdom were holding its breath, waiting for the renewal that morning would bring. When the first pale light touched the horizon, a servant would quietly open the doors. Fresh air drifted in, carrying the cool scent of the river and the faint smoke of early hearths beginning their day. The pharaoh stirred, not abruptly, but with the slow awareness of one returning from another world. His eyes opened to the soft dawn, and he breathed in deeply, the living embodiment of Ra's rebirth. On a small table beside the bed, a tray awaited, a bowl of cool water, fresh fruit, and a small piece of bread baked before sunrise. This simple meal marked his return to the waking world, a ritual of renewal mirroring the great cosmic cycle itself. For those who served him, this moment confirmed the order of the world. The pharaoh had slept, dreamed, and awakened, as the sun would always rise, as the river would always flow. The boundaries between man and God, between dream and waking, between night and day, had once again been crossed in harmony. It is difficult, perhaps, for us to imagine a world where sleep was sacred, where each breath taken in rest was a form of worship. Yet in ancient Egypt, this belief shaped every life. To sleep was to surrender to the unknown, but also to trust that the world would continue. The pharaoh's slumber was the nation's promise, his awakening, their assurance of life renewed. As the morning light spread across the temple roofs and fields of green, the great cycle began again. And though the details of his meal, the figs, the honey, the milk, might fade into memory, the ritual remained eternal. What pharaohs truly ate before sleep was not just food, but faith, nourishment for the body, and offering for the soul. And as the palace stirred once more with sound and motion, the stillness of the night lingered, like incense smoke fading slowly, gently, into the dawn. Long after the last of the pharaohs had drifted into legend, the sands of Egypt kept their secrets. Beneath the shifting dunes, in chambers sealed for millennia, the traces of royal meals remained, silent, preserved, waiting. It was not gold or jewels that most intrigued archaeologists when these tombs were opened, but the small, everyday things. A loaf of bread hardened by time, a jar of honey still glistening faintly after 3,000 years, a basket of dried figs wrapped in faded linen. These humble remnants whispered stories of how kings once dined, and how the sacred act of nourishment continued beyond death itself. Imagine the air of a tomb when first unsealed, still and heavy, scented faintly of dust, resin, and ancient oils. The walls glimmer with painted feasts, tables piled high with loaves and geese, jars of beer, and platters of fruit. Each image was both depiction and offering, meant to feed the spirit of the pharaoh through eternity. For the ancient Egyptians, the boundary between life and afterlife was thin. What sustained the body would sustain the soul, too. Archaeologists began to notice patterns. Certain foods appeared again and again in tombs across centuries: bread, beer, beef, poultry, fish, figs, dates, onions, and honey. These were not simply the favorites of individuals, but the foundations of Egyptian existence. Even in royal tombs, luxury was balanced with ritual simplicity. The pharaoh, though divine, ate what the Nile provided. And so, these remnants, carefully studied under the lens of science, became a language of their own, a quiet record of Egypt's daily rhythm. In one tomb, researchers found loaves of bread baked in conical molds, their surfaces still imprinted with the fingers of the ancient bakers. In another, residue analysis from pottery revealed traces of date wine, sweet, aromatic, and rich in sugar. Jars labeled with hieroglyphs identified their contents as beer of the palace or honey of Upper Egypt. Through careful chemical testing, scientists could even determine the ingredients: emmer wheat, barley, coriander, fenugreek, and carob. It is strange, perhaps, to think of chemistry uncovering the taste of history. Yet this is precisely what modern archaeologists have done. In laboratories far from the Nile, fragments of food are ground, dissolved, and analyzed, revealing proteins, fats, and sugars that once nourished the living gods. From these, entire menus have been reconstructed, quiet, factual, and utterly human. One particularly well-preserved discovery came from the tomb of Tutankhamun. Among his treasures were not only gold and ivory, but baskets of food: dates, almonds, raisins, sesame, bread, even roasted ducks, all placed there with deliberate care, as if the young pharaoh might awaken at any moment and need supper before continuing his eternal journey. The jars were sealed with linen and resin, still bearing the fingerprints of those who last touched them. When scientists opened one such jar in the 20th century, they found honey so well preserved that it was still edible, a sweetness untouched by time. Archaeologists have also uncovered offering tables carved with hieroglyphs listing specific foods meant for the deceased. These inscriptions read almost like shopping lists: one loaf of white bread, one jug of beer, one head of cattle, one goose, 2 baskets of fruit. Through them, we glimpse the balance of sustenance and ritual. The pharaoh's meal was not about indulgence. It was about continuity, maintaining the divine order of nourishment that kept the cosmos aligned. Even the simplest items carry profound meaning. Bread, the cornerstone of every Egyptian meal, symbolized life itself. Beer represented community and gratitude. Onions and garlic were believed to ward off sickness, while honey was sacred to the gods. Figs embodied fertility and renewal. To eat was to participate in the eternal cycle, a cycle the pharaoh could not escape, even in death. The walls of the tombs echo this understanding. Painted servants bring trays of food to their master. Cows are led to sacrifice. Grain is ground into flour. The scenes are repetitive, yet soothing, an unending rhythm of preparation, offering, and renewal. Even after centuries of decay, the pigments remain soft and warm. Ochre, gold, faded red. When you gaze upon these walls, it feels almost as though the past continues its gentle motion, undisturbed by time. And in a sense it does. The archaeologist brushing sand from a loaf of bread or lifting a clay jar does not merely uncover an artifact. They awaken a memory of a meal once shared in silence under the glow of oil lamps. What pharaohs truly ate before sleep was not lost to history, only buried in it. Each discovery adds another layer to the story, soft and precise as the layers of linen that once wrapped a king. The beauty of this study lies in its stillness. Unlike tales of conquest or intrigue, it is the quiet history of sustenance, of how human hands shaped grain, of how ritual turned the ordinary into the sacred. These remnants, found in the still air of tombs, remind us that behind the grandeur of pyramids and temples stood simple human needs: hunger, rest, and the wish to be remembered. The pharaohs may have dined on gold-trimmed plates, but what they ate, bread, fruit, honey, wine, was the same that any family might have placed upon their humble table at dusk. In this, the divine and the common were not so different. Beneath the rituals, Egypt's greatness was built upon nourishment, a shared, quiet rhythm that connected gods and men, kings and bakers, the living and the dead. And as archaeologists continue to uncover these traces, brushing away the sands of time, we find that even the most ordinary meal, preserved by accident or design, can whisper of eternity. In ancient Egypt, food was never just food. Every grain of wheat, every drop of milk, every fig dried beneath the sun carried the pulse of belief. To eat was to honor the gods, to participate in creation, to reaffirm one's place in the cosmic order. The pharaoh's meal, carefully chosen and ritually prepared, was not a moment of indulgence, but of worship, a continuation of divine balance through the simple act of nourishment. Imagine yourself standing inside a temple courtyard at dusk. The air is warm, touched with the scent of incense and roasting grain. Priests move with quiet precision, arranging offerings upon stone altars. Loaves of bread shaped like the sun, bowls of honey gleaming amber in the fading light, vessels of milk and wine, fresh dates still clinging to their stems. Each object holds meaning: bread for life, honey for eternity, milk for purity, wine for divine joy. These are not arbitrary gifts. They were language, a language of faith expressed through flavor, color, and scent. For the Egyptians, the act of offering food was a way to sustain both gods and souls. The offerings were not meant to feed the physical hunger of deities, but to maintain the sacred connection between worlds. To offer food was to say, "We remember you. We honor your order. Continue to bless the flood and the harvest." In this way, the entire rhythm of Egyptian civilization, its floods, its crops, its festivals, revolved around a spiritual exchange of nourishment. The same principle extended into death. When a pharaoh died, he was not considered gone, but transformed, continuing his journey in another form. To sustain him there, tombs were filled with food offerings: bread baked by temple women, beer brewed by palace servants, geese roasted and sealed in jars. Over time, these became symbolic rather than literal. In later dynasties, instead of real food, artisans carved stone loaves or painted banquets on the walls, because representation, in the Egyptian mind, was as powerful as reality itself. Every loaf, every painted goose, every carved fig was a promise that life would not end, that the pharaoh's soul would be fed forever. These images, preserved in vivid pigments of red, yellow, and blue, still seem to hum with quiet energy even now, thousands of years later. Their stillness is not emptiness, but endurance. To the modern observer, it can seem paradoxical how a civilization so steeped in ritual could also find peace in simplicity. Yet for the Egyptians, simplicity was sacred. The same bread that nourished a peasant could sustain a god if offered in the right way. The difference lay not in the object, but in the intention behind it. Even the humblest act of baking carried echoes of eternity. At the heart of this belief was Ma'at, the principle of balance, harmony, and cosmic order. To maintain Ma'at was the pharaoh's sacred duty. His meals were not private indulgence, but public reassurance that the world was in alignment. When he ate bread and honey, it was more than sustenance. It was a reenactment of creation, a ritualized harmony between man, nature, and divinity. Scholars studying temple inscriptions note how often food is used as metaphor. The gods are said to feed upon truth. The souls of the righteous drink from the river of stars. The Book of the Dead describes the deceased being granted cakes of heaven and wine of eternity. To the Egyptian mind, nourishment was both physical and spiritual, a thread connecting the mortal and immortal realms. Even festivals echoed this understanding. During the Feast of the Valley, families brought food to the tombs of their ancestors, laying it out beneath the open sky. They would eat beside the dead, sharing bread, beer, and laughter, believing that the spirits joined invisibly in the meal. This mingling of joy and reverence, life and death, created a uniquely Egyptian serenity, one that viewed existence as cyclical, not linear. The food itself was often symbolic in color as well as taste. Red fruits and meats evoked vitality and the power of the sun. White foods, milk, onions, and certain breads, represented purity. Green herbs and figs stood for rebirth and the fertile banks of the Nile. In every flavor was a story, in every texture a reflection of faith. One might picture a priest standing before a temple altar at night, the stars reflected in the still surface of a libation bowl. He raises a small piece of bread, murmurs a prayer, and places it upon the stone. The gesture is small, yet infinite. Through it, he participates in the same eternal rhythm that once guided pharaohs, farmers, and gods alike. Even today, archaeologists uncover offering tables still marked with faint stains of oil and grain. To touch them is to feel the quiet continuity of a culture that believed nothing, not even a meal, was without meaning. In those traces of bread and honey, we see the persistence of human hope, the wish that something as simple as nourishment could defy the passage of time. And so, when we speak of what pharaohs truly ate before sleep, we speak not only of food but of faith. Each bite, each sip, each ritual was part of a greater dialogue between earth and sky, body and spirit, life and afterlife. The ancient Egyptians may have slept surrounded by gold and incense, but what truly sustained them, then as now, was the quiet certainty that the cycle of nourishment would never end. To feed, to dream, to awaken, all parts of the same eternal meal. Over the centuries, as dynasties rose and fell and the sands crept slowly over the monuments, the meaning of these sacred meals did not vanish. Instead, it changed form, adapting, enduring, echoing softly through time. The pharaoh's final supper became legend, but its essence lived on in the daily rituals of the people. Even long after the pyramids ceased to be built and the great temples fell quiet, the rhythms of nourishment and offering continued to shape Egyptian life. Archaeologists, when they brush away the fine dust from a painted wall or lift a jar sealed with ancient linen, are not simply uncovering relics. They are uncovering memory. Within these objects lies a continuity so delicate that it almost feels alive. A loaf of bread hardened to stone still carries the fingerprints of the baker who shaped it. A residue of honey or oil still glows faintly with the warmth of human hands. These traces are not only archaeological data, but emotional imprints, lingering connections across thousands of years. Modern science, too, has lent new insight into these remnants of ritual and sustenance. Using techniques such as gas chromatography and mass spectrometry, researchers can detect the molecular echoes of foods long gone. Traces of emmer wheat, date syrup, coriander, and even ancient fats preserved in ceramics. These findings confirm what hieroglyphs and art already suggested, that Egyptian cuisine, even for royalty, was rich yet modest, varied yet bound to the land. The pharaoh's diet, viewed through this lens, tells a story not of excess but of equilibrium. There are no grand banquets for spectacle, no feasts of wasteful abundance. Instead, there was repetition, comforting, ritualized, precise. The same breads, the same fruits, the same fragrant oils prepared again and again, in rhythm with the turning of the seasons and the rise and fall of the Nile. This repetition, rather than dulling the experience, deepened it. Each meal became an act of remembrance, an affirmation that the world remained in harmony. In temples, priests continued to enact these offerings long after the pharaohs themselves had turned to dust. At dawn, they would place small portions of bread and fruit before the statues of gods, whispering the same invocations that had once been spoken in royal chambers. At dusk, they would remove the offerings, now believed to have been spiritually consumed, and distribute them among temple workers. Thus, divine nourishment flowed back to the living, a cycle of giving and receiving that mirrored the movement of the river itself. Through these rituals, food became a bridge between the human and divine realms. It was never only about eating, it was about continuity, gratitude, and order. Even the humblest temple priest, placing a single fig upon a stone altar, was continuing a gesture once performed by kings. In that small motion lay the weight of eternity, the shared understanding that to feed the divine was to sustain the world. The influence of these practices spread far beyond Egypt's borders. Greek visitors to Egypt wrote with fascination of the priests' strict diets and their avoidance of certain foods. Herodotus described Egyptian priests as the most disciplined of eaters, consuming bread, wine, and vegetables, but little else, and bathing multiple times a day to preserve ritual purity. Centuries later, elements of these dietary customs found echoes in other Mediterranean cultures, in early monastic traditions, and even in modern symbolic fasting practices. In a sense, the pharaoh's meal before sleep became a pattern, a kind of blueprint for sacred simplicity. A quiet meal, eaten with awareness, infused with gratitude, became an expression of faith rather than luxury. Whether through bread and honey in Egypt, rice and incense in Asia, or wine and bread in later religious rites, the same human instinct persisted, to connect nourishment with meaning and the ordinary with the divine. When we look at the objects left behind, the offering tables carved from limestone, the delicate vessels once filled with wine, the painted scenes of eternal feasts, we are not just seeing decoration. We are seeing a worldview, one that believed deeply in the harmony between sustenance and spirit. Each object, each brushstroke, was a declaration that life itself was sacred. Even the color choices within tomb art reflected this. Gold represented eternity, blue the heavens, green fertility, red vitality, and white purity. Together, they formed a language of calm reassurance, a palette of immortality. These colors still shine softly today beneath the flicker of torchlight in hidden chambers, their pigments protected by dry air and darkness. To stand before them is to sense not only the artistry, but the serenity of those who painted them. Hands steady, strokes deliberate, every detail crafted to invite peace into eternity. In one late temple inscription, the act of offering bread is described as feeding the horizon. The phrase is both poetic and precise. To offer sustenance was to ensure the continuation of dawn itself. In that simple act lay the assurance that the world would go on, that Ra would rise again, that the Nile would swell, that balance would be restored each day. Perhaps this is why, even now, when we learn what pharaohs ate before sleep, the knowledge feels strangely comforting. It connects us not through grandeur, but through familiarity. The bread, the figs, the honey, they are not distant relics, but reminders of something timeless, the quiet universality of nourishment. As the archaeologist leaves the tomb, brushing the last dust from a carved offering table, the air grows still again. The tools are packed away. The chamber darkens. And within that silence, beneath layers of sand and centuries, the ancient meal endures, not decayed, but transformed. Still fragrant in memory, still sacred in meaning, still waiting for the light to return. While the pharaoh lay upon linen sheets perfumed with cedar and honey, thousands of his subjects drifted to sleep on woven reed mats. Their homes were not carved in stone or painted with the heavens, but built of sun-baked mud brick, warm to the touch by day and cool by night. Yet beneath the vast Egyptian sky, the rhythm of their evenings followed a similar pattern. The same slow winding down of daylight, the same need for food, for rest, for renewal. The great contrast between palace and village was not only in wealth, but in materials, in texture, in the quiet details of survival. Where the pharaoh's meal symbolized divine order, the commoner's supper represented endurance, the daily triumph of human hands over the earth challenges. And yet, in its own way, it too was sacred. Imagine a small village along the banks of the Nile. The sun has just slipped below the horizon, leaving a soft violet light that turns the water to polished bronze. Families gather before their homes, the air filled with the faint crackle of fires and the smell of grain porridge simmering. Children chase each other through the dust before being called inside. Somewhere, a donkey brays. The sounds are ordinary, but comforting, a lullaby of labor and belonging. A typical meal for ordinary Egyptians was humble but nourishing. Barley or emmer wheat formed the basis of their diet, ground into flour and baked into flat loaves or coarse bread. Lentils, chickpeas, and onions were common, along with cucumbers, leeks, and garlic. The people of the Nile Valley cultivated vegetables in small garden plots fed by irrigation canals, while dates and figs provided sweetness. Fish from the river and small birds from the reeds were occasional luxuries, salted or dried for preservation. Their drink was not wine, but beer, thick, cloudy, made from fermented bread. It was mild, nutritious, and safer than water from the open river. Even children drank it, though weaker in strength. To the farmer or the potter, this was not indulgence but sustenance, as vital as bread itself. And in the quiet hours of evening, as the fires burned low, families shared these modest meals together. The rhythm of chewing, the murmur of conversation, the slow descent into rest. The walls of their homes were plain, but the night sky served as decoration enough. Through the open roof, one could see the constellations the same Pharaoh studied, the same stars painted upon his ceiling. The great divide of wealth seemed smaller beneath that shared expanse of darkness. Both the king and his subjects depended on the Nile's floods, on the rising of the sun, on the turning of seasons. In sleep, perhaps, they dreamed the same dreams, of abundance, of safety, of another day's light. There was no honeyed milk for these villagers before bed, but sometimes there was a piece of fruit or a handful of nuts. Children might fall asleep with the sweet taste of dates still on their tongues, their parents speaking softly nearby. A jar of water stood by the door, cool from the evening air. The flicker of a single oil lamp cast long shadows that swayed with the night breeze, and the scent of burnt oil mingled with that of earth and grain. To live in ancient Egypt as a commoner was to exist in close conversation with the land. Each day began before dawn and ended after dusk, shaped entirely by light, by harvest, by the river's moods. Their food reflected this intimacy, nothing wasted, everything purposeful. Even the act of grinding grain or baking bread was filled with ritual precision, passed from one generation to the next. Mothers taught daughters how to knead dough to the right texture, how to mix barley with herbs, how to bake loaves within clay ovens until they smelled faintly sweet. The pharaoh's banquets may have been gilded and perfumed, but the taste of freshly baked bread from a village oven was just as sacred in its own quiet way. It carried the warmth of the earth, the labor of human hands, and the steady rhythm of survival. When the villagers ate together, they reenacted, unknowingly, the same cosmic harmony that priests described in temples. Their bread, too, was a symbol of life. Their beer, too, was a prayer for continuity. As darkness deepened, the sounds of the village softened. Crickets sang from the riverbanks. A dog barked in the distance, answered by another. The moon, high and pale, spread silver light over the roofs. A woman extinguished the lamp with a breath. A man stirred the embers one last time. Then silence, vast, tender, complete. And though their homes were humble, their sleep was no less significant than the pharaohs. For the Egyptians believed that all souls, whether royal or common, entered the same dream realm each night. In that sacred darkness, distinctions vanished. The divine boat of Are carried everyone through the underworld, through danger and renewal, until the dawn brought them home again. Thus, even in their simplicity, the villagers shared in eternity. Their meals, their sleep, their small rituals, each reflected the same great pattern that bound the heavens to the earth. Beneath the same moon, the same stars, the same breath of wind off the Nile, all Egypt slept, one vast, breathing organism, dreaming together of another sunrise. In the quiet hierarchy between the pharaoh and the farmer, there existed another class, the scribes, the artisans, and the craftsmen. They were not noble by birth, yet their skills bound the kingdom together. With stylus and chisel, with paint and hammer, they gave form to eternity. The temples and tombs, the statues and hieroglyphs that still whisper from the desert today were the work of these hands, calloused, steady, endlessly patient. By day, their world was one of labor and precision. The scribe bent over a sheet of papyrus, recording grain deliveries or temple accounts. His reed brush, dipped in black and red ink, traced the sacred symbols that kept order within the state. The craftsman carved limestone figures of gods and kings, smoothing the stone until it gleamed beneath the sun. The painter crushed ochre and malachite into powder, mixing colors that would outlast empires. But as the light softened and shadows stretched long, this world of measured toil began to fade. Tools were cleaned and set aside, pigments covered, scrolls rolled carefully into baskets. The day's sounds, the steady chipping of stone, the rhythmic chanting of work songs, slowed into silence. Evening descended upon Deir el-Medina, the artisans' village near the Valley of the Kings. Imagine it. Small homes lined along narrow streets, their whitewashed walls catching the final golden light. Women draw water from wells, their bracelets clinking softly. The air smells of dust, oil, and roasted grain. Inside one home, a pot of lentil stew simmers gently over coals. The sound is faint, like a heartbeat. These artisans were paid in rations, grain, oil, vegetables, and occasionally beer. Their meals, though modest compared to the feasts of the palace, carried a quiet dignity. Bread was still the foundation, dense and dark, baked in conical molds. On special days, they might share roasted fish from the river, seasoned with herbs gathered near the fields. And always there was beer, a gift of fermentation that tied every class together. After supper, the men would often gather outside, seated upon low stools. They talked in low tones about their work, a cracked block of stone, a difficult carving, a new design for a tomb painting. Some nights, they spoke of dreams, for they too believed in the messages that came through sleep. The stars above the valley glowed softly, their patterns mirrored in the layout of tombs below. The artisans, in their own way, were shaping the heavens upon earth. The scribes, meanwhile, lived slightly differently. Their literacy made them powerful. Their hands never grew rough from stone or clay. Yet their work was unending. A scribe might continue writing long after sunset, his lamp flickering over the papyrus scroll. His food was simple, bread dipped in oil, a few figs, perhaps some cheese. As he wrote, he sometimes included small notes to himself, reminders, reflections, prayers. One such note found centuries later reads simply, "May the ink flow as the Nile, and may my hand not tire before the moon sets." In the rhythm of these lives, we sense both labor and tranquility. There was exhaustion, of course, but also purpose, the knowledge that their work would endure. To carve a line upon a tomb wall, or to write a name upon papyrus, was to touch eternity. And so, as night deepened, they rested with quiet pride. The beds of artisans and scribes were not grand, yet they held comfort born of familiarity. Wooden frames with corded bases supported woven mats, and the headrests resembled the Pharaohs in shape, though not in decoration. Linen sheets, coarse but clean, offered a kind of humble luxury. The smell of oil lamps lingered in the air, mingling with the faint scent of stone dust and pigment, reminders of the day's labors. In some houses, small amulets were placed near the bed, symbols of protection, carved from faience or bone. The eye of Horus, a scarab, a tiny figure of the goddess Taret, guardian of mothers and sleep. These charms were not superstition to them, but companionship in the darkness, a reassurance that divine eyes watched even the lowliest of workers. As they lay down, the village softened into silence. The stars above the desert shimmered faintly, reflected in the polished stones of distant tomb entrances. Somewhere in the distance, a guard at the Valley of the Kings shifted his spear and hummed a low tune, a rhythm echoing through centuries. The artisan's breath fell in unison, slow and steady, as if in quiet response to the pulse of the Nile below. To imagine this is to sense the unity that bound ancient Egypt together. From pharaoh to peasant, from scribe to stonecutter, all were woven into the same eternal cycle of work and rest, creation and renewal. Their food, their rituals, their dreams, all spoke to a civilization that found the divine in repetition, in patience, in the quiet endurance of the everyday. As sleep deepened across the valley, the desert cooled. The sands that had burned beneath the sun now released their heat into the starlit air. The tombs stood silent, half-carved, waiting for morning. And within those humble homes, the hands that built eternity rested, at peace in the knowledge that their work and their dreams would outlast their mortal years. Above the laborers' villages and beyond the palace gates lay another world, the world of Egypt's elite. It was quieter, refined, and curiously still. The grand villas of the noble families stretched across fertile estates near the river, surrounded by gardens where date palms whispered softly in the evening breeze. Pools lined with lotus flowers reflected the pale moonlight, their surfaces trembling slightly when frogs stirred among the reeds. Inside these homes, life followed the rhythm of privilege, but also of duty. The nobility served as priests, overseers, or administrators, bound to the pharaoh's will and the god's order. Their wealth afforded them comfort, yet their responsibilities weighed heavily. As night descended, they too sought rest, though in a different fashion for both peasant and king. A nobleman's evening meal was an affair of deliberate calm. The air smelled faintly of roasted goose, coriander, and wine. Servants moved softly, their bare feet soundless on cool stone floors. The meal began with bread and fruit, pomegranates, figs, or grapes, depending on the season, followed by fish from the Nile or game birds roasted over low flame. Honey, olive oil, and herbs added gentle fragrance rather than intensity. Egyptian taste prized balance, not excess. Yet, even amid abundance, moderation was considered virtuous. Ancient writings advised, do not fill your stomach to its limit. A mouthful less brings the heart peace. Such maxims were recited as quietly as prayers, spoken more to oneself than to others. In this way, the act of dining became a moral ritual, a meditation on balance, humility, and the fleeting nature of pleasure. After supper, the noble family would often gather in shaded courtyards where oil lamps flickered beside pools of water. Music drifted from distant rooms, the soft plucking of a lute, the sigh of a reed flute. Slaves poured wine into alabaster cups, the scent faintly sweet. Conversations unfolded in calm voices about harvests, temple offerings, and the pharaoh's decrees. There was laughter, sometimes, but restrained. Amusement never became noise. When the music faded, the household withdrew towards sleep. The head of the family offered a small libation to the household gods, a drop of wine, a few crumbs of bread, placed near the doorway as a sign of gratitude. May tomorrow come in peace, he might whisper. The gesture was simple, but within it lay a profound awareness that prosperity was borrowed, not owned. Within the noble bedrooms, luxury took on a tranquil form. Beds were framed in carved wood and gilded with small details. Lotus motifs, falcons in flight, papyrus bundles, but their beauty was softened by dim light and quiet air. Fine linen sheets, scented with myrrh and rose oil, were turned down by careful hands. The faint hiss of burning oil marked the room's stillness. Outside, palm fronds swayed gently, scattering shifting shadows across painted walls. Sleep, for these people, carried not just comfort, but symbolism. The priestly elite believed that to rest was to imitate Osiris, to die a little each night and awaken renewed with the dawn, just as the god rose again through the power of love and order. In their dreams, they might glimpse the same divine harmony that the pharaoh himself invoked. It is easy to imagine one such priest, his duties complete, his thoughts lingering upon the day's rituals. He removes his sandals, washes his hands in perfumed water, and extinguishes the lamp. The darkness embraces him like a cloak. His breath slows, and in the silence, he finds a serenity that even gold cannot provide. Across Egypt, from palace to village to tomb, this nightly stillness united every soul. The pharaoh slept to sustain the cosmos. The priest slept to guard the divine order. The craftsman slept to recover his strength for another day's labor. And the farmer, exhausted yet content, slept because life itself demanded renewal. Different lives, yet all bound by one rhythm, that of the rising and setting sun. The food that filled their stomachs before rest varied, yet its meaning did not. Each meal was a bridge between the labor of the day and the mystery of the night. Each bite, a prayer for survival, gratitude, or peace. And as dawn returned, as it always did, these distinctions of rank and privilege seemed to dissolve for a moment in the soft light of beginning. In ancient tombs, depictions of banquets and offerings often show this unity in symbolic form. Pharaohs feast beside gods, nobles beside ancestors, and even servants appear among the painted guests, pouring wine or holding baskets of bread. Death was the great equalizer, and eternity the great banquet where all would one day dine together. Perhaps this idea comforted them as they drifted into sleep. Perhaps they found solace in the belief that the same gods who watched over kings also guarded farmers and scribes. Or perhaps, like us, they simply listened to the quiet around them, the sound of wind through reeds, the pulse of the river, the whisper of dreams beginning to form. In the hush of the high houses, the final lamps flickered and died. The stars deepened over the land of Egypt, and beneath their light, all classes, pharaohs, nobles, artisans, and peasants alike, lay still. The entire kingdom rested upon one breath, one heartbeat, one endless rhythm of life and renewal. And so, as the long night of Egypt draws to its quiet end, we find ourselves returning from the banks of the Nile to our own still rooms, to the hum of the present, to the rhythm of our own breath. The stars above have shifted only slightly in 5,000 years, yet they shine upon the same truth. Every human age, no matter how distant or grand, ends the same way, in rest, in stillness, in the soft surrender to sleep. The pharaohs dined upon honey and figs before closing their eyes. The artisans shared coarse bread and beer. The farmers tasted the day's final warmth in lentil stew before lying down upon woven mats. And each, in their own way, trusted that morning would come again, that our day would rise, that life would continue. It is comforting, perhaps, to imagine them sleeping, the same wind that brushed against their temples still moving through our world tonight, the same moon gliding across the same silent sky. Their bodies have long since turned to dust, yet their habits, their hopes, their hunger for peace remain alive within us. When you lie down tonight, you're not so far from them. The rhythm of your breath echoes theirs. The warmth of your bed, though born of another age, carries the same promise, renewal through rest. The meals we eat, the rituals we perform before sleep, brushing away the day's noise, dimming the lights, allowing silence to settle, are not so different from those of ancient Egypt. The world changes, yet the need for calm, for comfort, for closure endures. Perhaps that is what history truly teaches when it is allowed to whisper rather than shout. Not the triumphs of conquest, not the monuments or crowns, but the gentle persistence of life, the quiet human wish to rest and wake again beneath familiar skies. So, if this soft telling has eased you even slightly, if these ancient rhythms have carried you toward peace, let them linger. Let the stories fade like incense in the dawn. Let sleep find you, as it once found the pharaohs, the farmers, and the dreamers of Egypt. Thank you for resting here with the sleepy historian. If this gentle journey helped you drift towards stillness, feel free to like the video, but only if it truly brought you peace. Subscribe if you wish to travel through other forgotten nights of history, softly told and meant for rest. And tell me, in the comments below, where and when you listen. It's quietly comforting to imagine this shared moment, scattered across the world, all of us falling asleep to the same old stories. So breathe deeply. Let the noise of the modern world slip away. The Nile flows on. The stars turn overhead. And somewhere, far away, a pharaoh dreams again.